50 years ago today, Americans were paying their respects to President John F. Kennedy, assassinated 2 days earlier.
Oswald has been shot.
And as that was happening, Kennedy's accused assassin was gunned down in front of television cameras. We will look back with two journalists who brought the horror of that weekend to people across Connecticut, Dick Ahles and Don Noel. And a local woman shares her memories of that awful day and her message from First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy. All straight ahead on Face the State this Sunday, November 24th, 2013.
This is Face the State with Dennis House, Connecticut's most watched local political program.
Good morning and welcome to Face the State. This weekend marks a half-century since an event that horrified America and changed the course of history, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And with us today to talk about that day and the weekend and how it was covered here in Connecticut are two veteran journalists, Dick Ahles, retired Vice President of News for WFSB, and our old call letters, WTIC. Also, Don Noel, the former moderator of this program at FSB, and before that, a reporter with the Hartford Times, and later, the Hartford Current. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
I want to first begin with you, Dick. Where were you when you heard that President Kennedy had been shot?
I was coming into the lobby at Channel 3 Broadcast House in downtown Hartford from lunch, and a bulletin came up from CBS News, Walter Cronkite's voice saying 2 shots had been fired at the president's motorcade in Dallas. Didn't say he was hurt or anything else. And we stayed there, of course, and within a couple of minutes, the Cronkite was on announcing he was killed.
And Don, at that time, you were working for the Hartford Times. Where were you?
I was in New York City. I had a day to visit the United Nations. We were having lunch in a Japanese restaurant a few blocks from the UN, and the radio was turned up so that we heard it, and we went across the street, and I ended up writing a piece for the afternoon Hartford Times on a General Assembly special session.
We've all seen the iconic film of Walter Cronkite telling people what was going on. That was airing on Channel 3. We also shared our building with WTIC Radio at the time. And here's what the folks on the radio were hearing as the news broke.
Floyd, I have something rather important from the WTIC newsroom in the form of a bulletin. President Kennedy is reported to have been wounded by an assassin in Dallas, Texas. There are no further details available at this time. We repeat, President Kennedy has been wounded by an assassin in Dallas, Texas. We will have further details as received. I'm sure everybody joins us in deploring this regretful news.
I should think
so. We'll bring details as soon as we possibly can.
We certainly will. We'll stay right on top of that. All right, let's see if we can continue on with Mikeline here while awaiting any more news from our newsroom. Hello?
Oh, golly, isn't that awful?
It certainly is.
Well, I got the recipe. This is Ros Fichman.
Yes, Ros. Okay.
Oh, my. That just took my breath away.
Did ours, too.
Good so.
Well, one package, it's with the German sweet chocolate.
Yes, yes.
One package of the German sweet chocolate.
German sweet chocolate. Okay.
Oh, I can't even get my breath. My goodness. 1/2 cup butter or margarine.
1/2 cup butter. Okay.
1/2 cup boiling water.
1/2 cup boiling water.
2 cups of sugar.
2 cups of sugar. Will you hold it just a minute, Ros?
Sure.
We have some.
Here are further details from the WTIC newsroom. President Kennedy and Governor John B. Connally of Texas were cut down by an assassin's bullets as they toured downtown Dallas in an open automobile today. The president, his limp body cradled in the arms of his wife, was rushed to Parkland Hospital. We will give you further details as received. Well, this rather changes the complexion of many, many things at this time, and it looks as if we have 2 national victims here, the governor and the president, at this first reading. This is a very regretful thing, and the kind of news which I'm afraid is a little bit more than I care to handle, but we've got to be on the job anyway. We'll continue along, Floyd.
Oh, Ros, you're right in the middle of a terrible thing here. Perhaps we'd be best to just keep right on going as best we can, and we'll stay on top of the news as best we can here.
I don't feel like it. Can I?
Yes, all right. I understand it. I think that's smart. Okay, but give us a call when you can.
Yeah, I will.
All right, bye.
Now, this has got to be the worst. We have a good spirit here, but our responsibility here is to bring you information as soon as we can. Now, we don't want anyone to get the wrong idea on this. At the moment, it's a a very unfortunate and tragic historical circumstance that the President, along with Governor John B. Connally of Texas, were cut down by assassins' bullets as they toured down Dallas in an open automobile today. We're waiting for momentary news, and we're going to try to bring you
All right, let's go to
more
NBC.
information.
All right, so we covered some of that sound with just some old film from our building. It wasn't actually from that day, and then, of course, John F. Kennedy. But it really gives you a sense of what people were feeling that day, because we heard that woman's raw reaction.
Yeah, well, in defense of those two guys, Bob Steele and Floyd Richards, they were doing a call-in show called Mikeline, which specialized in recipes and lightweight stuff. And they got this information. CBS did the same thing. They had a soap opera on, and they went back to the soap opera after the first bulletin because they didn't have any other information. And so they were going from, you know, this terrible news, which was very confusing. They didn't want to say anything unless they knew it for sure. Cronkite was extremely careful to say that before he said that the president was killed. They were absolutely certain of it, but they had no other place to go.
So you're having lunch, you hear the president shot, what do you do next?
We get up, pay the bill, go over with our Japanese diplomat friend in the United Nations, and learned that they were having a General Assembly being called into session for a few words in a moment of silence or whatever, and went in and did that, and then phoned in a report that went into the late editions of that afternoon's Hartford Times.
So you filed for the Hartford Times from New York.
Yeah.
What was the rest of the weekend like for you in terms of coverage?
Devastating, devastating. I mean, I think nobody who lived through that but knew that this was just incredibly difficult stuff. Let me just back up and say, I sympathize with the Mikeline folks. My predecessor as editor of the Times, Bob Lucas, was a great editor, made the decision very early on, as soon as he knew that the death had occurred, wiped everything off page 1 of the Hartford Times, put Kennedy assassinated, and filled up the whole front page with a photograph of Kennedy. And all the rest of the news went in the back because he understood that's the only real news there was that night.
And Dick, in terms of local news coverage, Channel 3 basically stayed with Walter Cronkite, correct?
Oh, they stayed with CBS for the whole weekend. This was the event in which network television came of age. Before then, they had never done anything extensively live like this. They went with Walter Cronkite and the other, Dan Rather in Dallas, and the other CBS people, and stayed that way throughout the weekend. They may have broken for a brief newscast by Sunday night, but the first day and Saturday, it was almost all coverage of the events following the assassination. And there was plenty of news to report, of course.
We're going to talk about that in just a moment. When we come back, the local woman who sent a note of condolence to Jacqueline Kennedy and treasures the First Lady's response to this day. And more with Dick and Don. If you want to comment on today's program, you can do so right here. For many Americans, the assassination was like a death in the family. Many people were grieving, and close to 1 million people wrote condolence letters to former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy. One woman from West Hartford wrote a very poignant letter to Mrs. Kennedy, received a response, and today her letter lives on.
January 11th, 1964. Dear Mrs. Kennedy,
Carol Cohen was a young wife and mother on November 22nd, 1963. As soon as she got the news about what happened in Dallas, she turned on the TV.
On the day of President Kennedy's tragic and unnecessary death, my small son and I were at my mother's as usual for Friday night dinner. I was reading a book when my stepfather called and told us the shocking news. Neither my mother or I said anything. We just cried.
It was after a weekend of crying and watching the funeral on television that Carol knew exactly what she needed to do.
I looked at her children and I knew what they would be like without a father, and I looked at my mother and I knew she would associate with Jackie and growing up without her husband. And I felt I had to write.
It took weeks of feeling sad and depressed before Carol finally sat down at her typewriter and started to write Mrs. Kennedy, telling her about how President Roosevelt wrote to Carol's family when her father was killed in World War II.
My father had given his life for his country, as did President Kennedy.
3 days after Carol mailed the letter, Jacqueline Kennedy addressed the nation.
I want to take this opportunity to express my appreciation for the hundreds of thousands of messages nearly 800,000 in all, which my children and I have received over the past few weeks. The knowledge of the affection in which my husband was held by all of you has sustained me, and the warmth of these tributes is something I shall never forget.
Mrs. Kennedy is deeply appreciative of your sympathy and grateful for your thoughtfulness. I was really surprised to get this, and the envelope is in her handwriting.
48 years after receiving that card from Mrs. Kennedy, Carol Cohen received word her letter had been saved at the JFK Library and was going to be published in a book, Letters to Jackie.
Please excuse the length of this letter, but it's a rather difficult one for me to write, as I have a hard time expressing my feelings, especially when it comes to my father. I guess all I am trying to say is how awful I feel about what happened, and how my father and our late president had just a few things in common. They were loved, husbands, fathers, sons, and above all, they gave their most precious belonging for their country, their lives. May God be with you and your family.
That's beautiful. Was Carol Cohen from West Hartford, and she talked about being sad and depressed for about 6 weeks after. Did you find that?
Everybody was. Yeah. Dick,
our lives changed.
Yeah.
Really. It was he was a young president. Don and I were 50 years younger. You know, he was 46 years.
Easy.
And you know, we expected a lot more from him. This was going to be a big change. We had a very old man as president, Eisenhower, who was a very effective two-term president. But this was a new era. And the new younger people were coming into control.
And it had been brought up as Camelot. Everybody, even then, we look back at it, but even then, it was Camelot. It was very, very carefully staged. The nation was engaged with this young, dynamic president.
What was the outpouring of support and grief in Connecticut that you remember at all? I know it's been 50 years. I know games were canceled and some stores were closed.
And letters to the editor poured in. We had the advantage of the Hartford Times. We did not have a Sunday edition at that time. So Saturday was sort of all recapitulation of all we could remember about Kennedy, his visits to Hartford and so forth. And then we had a chance to rest that you guys didn't. But we came back Monday and were overwhelmed with letters.
Former Channel 3 anchor Dick Bertel was telling me that he believes he recalls they did a newscast on Sunday, a local newscast sometime on Sunday, and he said that the cameraman was crying as he read some of the stories on the news.
I'm not surprised, you know. And of course we were radio and television then, WTIC Radio and TV. It was a couple of years before the station were sold, and radio did the same thing. They had NBC radio coverage, and we had on Channel 3 CBS television coverage.
And Dick, you were sent to the funeral.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, I kind of talked myself into the funeral. I was in the office of the president of Channel 3, Paul Morency, on Sunday, right after Oswald had been killed. And Stan Simon, a reporter, came into the office and said, Governor Dempsey and his wife Mary are going to go to the funeral. I imagine we'd want to go. And they said, yes, go. And they assigned a photographer, Dick Ahles. And I said, could I go along? I could help. I could bring film to the airport, because it wasn't live TV then. You had to send black and white film on an airplane, Allegheny Airlines. And Morency said to me, you want to be part of history, don't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay. And then I looked in my wallet, and I had $3, and I said, before I become part of history, I need some cash, because we didn't have credit cards in those days.
That's right.
And I raised about $100 in that room, and then went off to Washington.
Did either of you ever interview Kennedy at any one time? I know you covered him at the Hartford Times, Don, right?
I never interviewed him one-to-one. Covered him and covered the speeches and so forth.
What was the Hartford Times scene like? We've shown that film. It's people as far as you can see.
Everybody's seen it, yeah, and it was humongous. He was not the first nor the last president or presidential candidate to appear on that portico, but his was the one that was most memorable. And, you know, he could hardly get there because the open convertible, I mean, I remember thinking what happened in Dallas. In Hartford, he was hardly moving through traffic, reaching out, touching people, shaking hands, and you thought, oh my.
You know, Dick, one of our previous conversations, you mentioned that as Walter Cronkite was cutting into the soap operas, there were complaints from viewers, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about that.
It was amazing. Not 5 or 10 minutes after the first announcement, or the announcement that the president died, they didn't go back to the soap opera, of course. People started calling up asking where their program was. And I was helping the people in at the switchboard in the lobby, and it got pretty hard to listen to their complaints.
You know, I think some young people find it very difficult to believe that the president was shot and there was no film from that scene for quite some time. What was the process like to develop film and get it on television? How long did it take?
Well, processing the film, it was like, you know, when you used to take photos to the drugstore to get them developed, you had to process the film. You couldn't just run it like tape now or after that shortly. When we went to the funeral, we would film an interview, as we did with Governor Dempsey at the cathedral before the funeral, and then I would take a cab over to National Airport to go to Allegheny Airlines, put it on the plane. It was flown to Hartford, picked up at the airport, processed in the lab, in the film lab here, and then put on the air.
Yeah, once you got it here, it wasn't that long. We were still in film when I came to Channel 3, and it was, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes. It was remarkably good. Yeah. But then somebody had to look at it and cut it and splice it and all that stuff.
So it wasn't an instantaneous process.
Oh,
like
no.
that. I was reading somewhere that one television station had the Zapruder film in their possession with Abraham Zapruder on their air while they were getting it processed, and then they didn't have the machines to do color film, so they lost out on really the scoop of the century. Gentlemen, we'll be back with you more in just a moment, and if you'd like to comment on today's program, you can do so right here.
Basically, this is Cutler's theory. On a warm, sunny November day, just like this one in Dealey Plaza, a man held up an umbrella just as President Kennedy approached in his car. The man shot a dart into Kennedy's throat, the umbrella being the firing mechanism. Now, all this sounds a little far-fetched, but some researchers believe it, and they point to some hard evidence.
In 1979, investigating the JFK assassination for Channel 3. And over the years, Channel 3 has done quite a bit of assassination coverage. Long after 1963, Denise DiCenzo interviewed a Secret Service agent who witnessed Kennedy's autopsy. What kind of things do you remember over the years in terms of what is...
Well, I had blessedly forgotten Bill O'Reilly's umbrella theory until I saw it last week, and which was one of the many, many, many crackpot theories that came along over the years, and they were covered just like real news. But I don't remember the early anniversary segments or anything like that, no.
But the stories went on for some time.
It continues to be alive. There's a program called Coast to Coast AM, which is carried by WTIC Radio from 1 till 5. 4 nights ago, they had the author of a new book on the assassination with a new theory. Not a new theory, an old theory. It was LBJ and so forth.
You gentlemen were obviously around when the Warren report came out. Did you believe it at first when it came out?
I have to say, I was a skeptic. It just seemed to me...
Right off the bat?
It seemed to be too pat. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I really had the grounds for it that some of the more recent conspiracy theory things had. It just didn't sound quite right to me.
And what do you believe today? Do you believe that...
It doesn't sound quite right to me.
Okay. Do you believe Lee Harvey Oswald worked alone?
No.
No. Dick?
I believe he worked alone.
Interesting. All right.
So, and for almost the same reason, because they pretty much proved that the shots were fired from the, 6th floor of that warehouse where Oswald worked, and they were the only shots that hit Kennedy. And none of the conspiracy theories seem to hold water as far as I'm concerned.
My personal belief is that I don't think it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he worked alone. I think there's still some unanswered questions. You hear these stories that a witness, a police officer met someone who said he was a Secret Service agent on the grassy knoll. Little things like that make you wonder, like...
Yeah. Well, Jack Ruby took care of the fact that we'll never know. I mean, that was the second great tragedy.
And one may or may not believe that was coincidental.
Exactly, yeah.
What kind of conspiracy theories do you believe in, Don, or you just don't believe he worked by himself?
I don't really believe in a conspiracy theory. I believe he didn't work by himself. I think it's just astonishing that the assassin should have been gotten out of the way so easily and so quickly. Maybe just happenstance, but wow. And there are, in fact, some different views as to where the bullets went and what the wounds were like, and all of that was taken care of pretty quickly.
When did you both realize just how historic that day was? Because you were very busy both days, and this was an event that you'd never experienced before.
Right there.
When it happened.
Yeah.
I mean, we're both old enough to remember when Franklin Roosevelt died, and he was the president of the first dozen years or so of our lives, and that was a great tragedy, but it was a natural death. And but this, I mean, the young president and the promising president and the popular president cut down like this was too much.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely different. FDR's death was sad. Kennedy's death was tragic and a loss to the nation, and even I think to some of the people who were not Kennedy supporters, it was a traumatic event.
How did your news gathering change after that day? That was television's defining moment.
Well, television changed after that day, and it showed that somebody was on PBS last week, Robert McNeil, who was with PBS and NBC before that, and he said things were happening too fast for newspapers that day and the next day. And I mean, Sunday, when the Hartford Times didn't have a newspaper, Oswald was murdered in the jailhouse. So television came of age and showed what it could be and what it could do. And the thing that struck me in watching some of the old tape this past week were how careful they were at CBS. And Walter Cronkite would not say that the president was dead until he was absolutely certain, and how careless cable news with its 24/7 coverage and its highly competitive nature has changed television, and not for the better.
It certainly has. Walter Cronkite was somewhat scooped during his own coverage there. He threw to a reporter, Eddie Barker, in Dallas, who said that a doctor told him Kennedy was dead, and then he threw it back to Walter Cronkite.
And in fact,
not confirmed.
The tape that you showed of Oswald being shot was not CBS. CBS did not have its camera on. It was an NBC, got it live. Yeah.
And they were the only station covering it live.
Right.
But I think your point is that it totally changed our sense of what news is. I mean, the Hartford Times was an afternoon paper. We replayed it 4 or 5 times in the course of the afternoon, but when we got it out to people's homes at 5 o'clock, they knew what had happened. All we could do was begin to give them thoughtful analysis and background and detail, but the bare ideas everybody knew already.
You know, it was the Morning Star Telegram in Fort Worth where Bob Schieffer worked, was saying that they had lines outside waiting for the next edition to come out. Did you experience that at all at the Hartford Times?
Yes.
Because that's how people got their news. If they couldn't get it on television,
but not many. More people then were already turning to television.
It may have been the last time there was a newspaper extra published in Connecticut, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Probably.
Probably. Of course, we had the Green Stripes then already, which was by its nature a late edition.
Right.
Bob Steele, Floyd Richards seemed pretty stoic during that whole coverage that they had, but
they were in shock. They were in shock. I mean, imagine when you're doing a program taking down a recipe, and you get word that the president's been shot. I mean, it was, and they had no place to go. That was a terrible position.
Yeah. And they eventually threw to music, I believe.
Right, I would imagine.
You know, for a while. Well, gentlemen, we thank you so much for being with us today. You're walking history and living history, and love chatting with you both.
Reliving the events. Thank you.
Dick Ahles and Don Noel. Thank you so much. Now, last week, we brought you some great old films of John F. Kennedy during his times here in Connecticut. He spent about 5 years going to school and then later came as a candidate and as president. We have that on our website right now, WFSB.com. Thanks for watching this Sunday. We'll see you later on.